Welcome to the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast dedicated to educating and engaging listeners on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. On this episode, we're actually stepping back from pop culture, and we're sitting down with a young lady who has overcome immense addiction and equally her road to sobriety. I'm Captain Nostalgia, and this is the Victims and Villains podcast. Please help me in welcoming Miss Chauncey Beeston.
Hi.
They can't see you waving.
Oh.
This is your first podcast, isn't it?
Yes, this is my first podcast.
How you feeling so far?
I'm so nervous.
So, we're here to kind of talk about your struggle with drugs and kind of the road to sobriety that you're currently on and have been on for a little over 2.5 years. So congratulations.
Thank you.
As I'm sure we'll get into here in just a little bit, it is extremely hard to come clean off of any vice, especially ones that you chose to kind of go through. And so I guess, let's start at the beginning. Typically, in my experience in kind of running this podcast, what I've found is that normally people that choose to go down roads of whether it's alcoholism or drugs or, just have nasty vices, it normally starts kind of at home, at kind of like a younger age, sometimes rough home life or bullying is like a teenager. But kind of, can you talk about where the, I guess, habits of drugs kind of started for you?
Yeah, sure. So I always thought that my childhood was pretty normal until, I started going over friends' houses and stuff. My real father was out of the picture when I was, 2 years old. And my stepfather, who I called Dad, was a huge alcoholic. And him and my mom would fight every night, and I hated it. It was awful, but it was what I saw, and they were always partying. They were super young. His best friend was in a band, and we used to go on tour with them. So I was 4 or 5 years old going on tour with these rock bands that were playing national shows. And I was just watching everybody party, and that's just what I thought that everybody did. That's what I thought that life was just a big party. And so my mom, so let me back up where I really believe that my traumas lie. Or my real father was out of the picture, that whole family was out of the picture. And then around when I was, I think 13 or 14, my mom and my stepdad finally got a divorce, and him and that whole family stopped talking to me as well. Oof. So I had huge abandonment issues. They were so bad. And I had really crazy attachment to my codependent relationship with my mom because she was the only thing that was ever there. And I was so scared that something would happen to her or she was going to leave. And I was real messed up. She enabled me a lot as well. And that's where I think everything really is rooted in all of that kind of childhood trauma.
Well, let's take a step back kind of before we start talking about the divorce and kind of the teenage issues. And atmospherically speaking, the environments that we are raised around have a deeper, more profound impact than I think some of us realize at times. I've talked about it on the show in the past before, where I've gone through some pretty toxic environments myself growing up. I would, similarly to you, I would say that I grew up in a fairly normal household, but kind of reflecting and doing retrospective speaking, I would say that I grew up around a lot of that partying and alcoholic environments, to where now I am cool with one drink, but like I don't want any more really than that because of the environment that I grew up around. Did you ever find that that is kind of also how you approach things like alcohol, being raised around that environment?
So yeah, it's crazy that you say that, because I grew up around a lot of like cousins, because my parents called all of their friends my aunts and uncles, and so none of them were blood related, but we all called each other cousins. And I have this one girl that I'm still friends with today. She was in the same exact environment as me, and where I went and I was like, this is what life is supposed to be like, this is what I want my life to be like I just glamorized it so much, like it was magical in my mind, but in her mind she was like, no, I don't ever want to do this, like this is not who I want to be. And I think it's crazy how, like, you know, being put in the same situation, like some people's brains just go the complete opposite. But I know for me that, like, I remember being a little girl and, you know, like 4 or 5 and being like, I can't wait to grow up so I can drink beer because it looks like so much fun.
Yeah, and I equally have like family that were kind of raised in those same environments, whereas like for me, like I have explicitly said like I won't ever do drugs aside from like the occasional like beer or caffeine, because, you know, coffee is a real thing. And but like I have like family that were raised around the same environment, went through the same exact trauma that I did, and I just was like, I don't ever want to feel this way. I don't ever want to feel this emptiness that I'm feeling as a child.
Yeah, I get that. And it's funny too, because I remember feeling that emptiness as a child and looking towards people who were drinking and partying and having this great time. I thought that was the answer.
Sure, because as a child, like we, you know, our brains are a little bit underdeveloped, so we kind of associate such like weird things with, you know, those things. Like it's a little bit of a weaker example, but I grew up and I loved the movie Spawn growing up, and like I always associated like Spawn with being this like really awesome superhero that was like basically like this independent version of like the Spectre, where it's like the wrath of Satan coming back up, and I was like, this is the coolest hero ever. And being an adult, like going back and revisiting that movie, and I was like, man, what was I thinking? This is garbage. And so I think that sometimes, you know, as kids, we make those assessments prematurely because like we're not as like fully functioned yet.
Right.
And not being a child psychologist, and if any children's psychologists hear this and I'm saying this wrong, please DM us or reach out to us, because I would love to set it right. But it's, you know, it's normal to kind of be around those environments and kind of feel those feelings of almost like envy that you're describing, to where you're like, man, like when I'm an adult, like it's just going to be this all the way.
Yeah.
And I think we have a lot of misconceptions about adulthood as children.
Yeah. One of my big things when I was little is I was so scared of everything. And I thought that like when you get to like 18, all of a sudden you're just not afraid anymore. So like when that didn't happen to me, I was like, oh shit, like I'm like, what do I do now? But it was something I just used to be like, wow, like my mom is so brave, you know, because that was my superhero. She's so brave, and like she's not scared of anything. And like, you know, later on down the road, I learned that that's not true. But that was one of my huge misconceptions, and also an expectation that really let me down when it didn't come about.
So, as I've stated, this is not a visual podcast, and you guys can't see this, but Chauncey has a shirt on supporting the cast of The Craft,
yes,
and just recently revisited that movie. I love that movie. And one of the characters, Nancy, who's played brilliantly by Fairuza Balk, has like not so great home life, to where you can kind of see like she has an alcoholic stepfather, a abusive stepfather as well, like just a real butthole when it comes to like being a father and even a husband as well. And I'm kind of wondering how close would that like illustration be to somewhere around like your own home life?
Yeah, I definitely related with Nancy. I remember when the movie came out. I was young. I was still living in New Canton. My stepdad was still around, and that's what it was like. It was just the constant arguing back and forth, people throwing stuff at each other, people smoking cigarettes in the house. My parents didn't work because my stepdad's parents had a lot of money. So it was almost magnified because there was no time for them to go to work, you know, and have any kind of normalcy. This was all the time. And I remember being a little girl and identifying so much with the character Nancy, because I was like, this is my home life. And let me tell you how many times I tried to cast spells to like give my stepdad a heart attack because I didn't want to be there anymore. And I was like, maybe if he dies, we'll come into money and all this stuff. I know that's so sick to think of. Is like, I think it was in like 4th grade when the movie came out. But I related to it so much, and that's probably why I still relate to it so much today. Like, I see a lot of my childhood in that character.
Well, so at what point did you start to have these ideas of beer's cool and like partying is awesome, can't wait to be an adult? Like, at what point did your viewpoint on that lifestyle fade from that to Nancy's home life sucks and I just want this guy dead?
I think it was intertwined in there.
Sure.
Because it wasn't always bad. Because there was the times when all these people are around and we're partying all the time and, like, they're just, you know, it's so much fun. It wasn't until it was behind closed doors. So it was kind of intertwined. It would be like, okay, I'm happy right now. Like, mom and dad are happy. But when mom and dad weren't happy, that's when I wanted.
So your happiness and your joy of the home life really was dependent on whether or not your parents were fighting or not.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was just so much chaos, and like it was either good chaos or it was bad chaos, and I was constantly up and down, and it shows today because I suffer from manic depression, bipolar 2, not like super extreme bipolar 1, but bipolar 2, to where I have manic depressions and I have manic episodes and I have really depressive episodes. I am medicated though, and
sure,
I'll stick by that.
So I'm almost curious too, is that you normally, for children that are raised in that environment, because like I said, I'm drawing also from personal experience to kind of like format these questions.
Yeah.
Because I see a lot of like my early upbringings and like what you're talking about. And mine wasn't to the level of like what you're talking about. I just want to, in case my family's listening, I just want to throw that out there. I was raised in a pretty decent household. But one of the things that I noticed about me as a kid, like looking back, was like, I had those like same aspirations where I'm like, oh, beer must be cool, like because it makes all this party happen. And I remember being probably like maybe like 10, 11, around like the first like time like I ever like tasted beer. And beers or some sort of alcohol is typically the kind of the gateway into like a larger,
for sure,
universe of vices.
For sure.
And how old were you the first time that, you know, being around this, like how old were you when you had first tasted alcohol?
I know that I was 5 when I first tried a beer, like on my own. But and then I'd had like my parents' friends like give me sips of alcohol, but I remember specifically in the 3rd grade we went to the Bahamas and my mom let me drink an entire pina colada and gave me a cigarette and was like, See, I told you wouldn't like that. And I was like, yeah. But in my head, I was like, I love this. This is me now. This is me now. The pina colada drinking, smoking 8-year-old or whatever. Like,
so did you find that alcohol was kind of that gateway into the awesomeness of adulthood that you were seeing portrayed?
For sure. Yeah, that's how it was in the beginning. Let me make that clear in the beginning. Yes. Yeah, I was like, this is it. Like, I feel accepted. Like, I don't feel that fear. The fear was gone, and it was just so much fun to me.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back, jumping into more of Chauncey's story. If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. Welcome back to Victims and Villains. And before the commercial break, we were talking about the gateway into alcohol and drugs. And you had talked about like being a young kid and like trying like a pina colada and like cigarettes for the first time. And at what point did alcohol become not enough to escape that fear you were talking about for the commercial break?
Oh, shoot, gosh. I don't even know what that point was. And to be honest, I don't think that I ever felt like it was.
Sure.
I don't think that it ever was enough to escape the whole fear. Yeah.
So alcohol has this tendency to kind of almost push pause on life's problems and fears and just the things that we try so hard to escape in. Like alcohol is just this great way of just like disappearing from that. And so with that, I want to almost kind of reframe that question, I guess, to say, how old were you when you had kind of tried something a little bit heavier than alcohol? Maybe weed, maybe a different drug, pills, or some of the other pharmaceutical.
Okay, yeah. So that kind of in the progression of things that kind of makes a little bit more sense. I really never had much of a liking for alcohol.
Sure.
But when I found weed, I was like, this is it. When I found pot, I was like, this is it. And I was a big pothead for a long time, but I would still drink, which is so crazy because even though I really didn't like drinking that much, like I was drinking all the time. And that was probably about 8th grade, I think, is when all of that happened. And I really didn't get to a point where that wasn't enough until I had my son when I was 17, and they gave me Percocets in the hospital after he was born.
That's a game changer for a lot of people.
Yeah. That was huge. And because during high school and all, I had like dabbled in other drugs, like a lot of pills, you know, and I was prescribed to Adderall and Xanax and Ambien, and like, so I just had like a plethora of pills all the time. But I remember distinctly being in the hospital with my son was just born, and they gave me the Percocets, and I was about to leave, and I was like, can y'all give me some more of these Percocets? And they were like, we're going to have to see. And I remember thinking in my head, they're going to have to get me these Percocets because I'm not going to be able to handle anything else for the rest of my life without them.
So what was the transition like for you from being a carefree teenager, you know, just being a pothead, to now being a mother and having that first taste of like Percocets? Like, what was that transition like?
So it was crazy because I can't ever say that I was ever a carefree teenager. I was really like mentally messed up. Okay. I had really bad depression all through high school, and to be honest, the first time that I was ever happy was when I got pregnant. And it could have to do with something about me not being on any kind of drugs or anything. Could have to do with hormones. But I remember that being the first time that I was ever truly happy. And then I had my son, and I completely forgot what the actual question was.
Well, so let's back up a little bit, because before we kind of jump into some of the drugs and your time playing pharmacy, let's jump into the divorce and kind of how that affected you, and the way that you talked about previously about having this now codependency on your mother, and then also having the abandonment issues. Like, how did that kind of factor into your approach of being a normal teenager, for one, but also to jumping into, you know, now trying like alcohol and weed parties together?
So that was tough because we had moved to Mechanicsville in Virginia, and we were building a house that we were going to live in, so we were staying in an apartment for a little while. And so then I had this big expectation that we're going to live in this house, and it's going to be so nice. And my mom had talked up Mechanicsville so much, and I was like, oh, we're living in this place. It's so nice. And then they got a divorce. And when they got a divorce, all that money was gone. The house was gone. It was just me and my mom in this apartment. And now the family that I've grown up with no longer talks to me. And I'm, you know, going through adolescence, going through, you know, hormonal changes and everything. And all I can think about is, if the people that were supposed to love me don't love me, how will anybody else love me? Like, because to me, in my head, your family was supposed to love you. You know, that was my dad. That's who I knew as my dad, and I called my dad since I was a little girl. And, like, to have that happen twice with two fathers and two families, it was like, I'm fucked. Like, nobody is ever going to love me. Nobody's ever going to want me. And it was really difficult because I wouldn't let people get close to me. And I think I portrayed that, like, fun party girl because that was easier if they didn't like this mask of a person that I was. You know, if they didn't like her, that wasn't really me, so it didn't bother me. And if I was constantly being fun and, you know, and wild and crazy, like, it was my way of manipulating people to view me a certain way, and I felt in control.
That's because it's so much easier to be around someone that is, you know, fun and has like energy, because I think it also leans into the stigma that we have around mental health. And it's like, well, you have these issues. I would rather be around the party version of you rather than actually be here for you. And think that what you experienced with going through that transition in your life from, being abandoned not once but twice by a father, how much did that affect your view of men, period?
Oh yeah, that was awful. It was weird though, because I think a lot of people with quote unquote daddy issues start seeking like sex and approval from guys. And my mom was one of those, strong, independent women who was like, you don't need no man for shit. So my view was be one of the guys. Like, don't sleep with the guys, be one of the guys. And that's how they knew me. Everybody knew me. Oh, Chauncey's just one of the guys. And then that affected me later on because I'd be like, but I'm still a girl. Oh, Chauncey doesn't count. She's one of the guys. And I'm like, yeah, but I have a vagina. Like, don't forget me. I can be pretty too. And it kind of threw me off. And probably another point that I should bring up that like threw me like completely up against the wall. After my parents divorced, I met my first like real boyfriend. I lost my virginity to him. I was 14. Like he was just, I looked at him like he was like this Greek god. Like he had this car and like it was a white Mustang, like nice. He wore Abercrombie and Fitch. Like he was a stud muffin, and he screwed me up so bad mentally. He used to tell me I was ugly and like no one would ever want me. He beat me. It came to the point where we tried to get the cops involved, and I couldn't get a restraining order against him because he wasn't over 17. We didn't have a kid together. We didn't live together, and I couldn't prove that the bruises were from him.
Wow.
And so that was like my third interaction with like any kind of love from a man ever. So I was just like, whatever, I'm going to be the crazy party girl. I'm not going to let anybody get close to me. I'm going to let them see me how I want them to see me. And it was just this view of, I'm never going to be in any kind of deep relationship with a man ever because they're always going to let me down.
Well, that kind of goes to Freud's depiction and his hypothesis on how women end up trying to chase after like the first like guy that they're going to end up marrying, or the first like guy that they get serious with, often kind of is a mirror for their own home life or their father. And it's, we see it more times than I think we realize about how closely that is. And at what point did you kind of like wake up and say like, this is not a good environment for me to be around?
I had woken up a long time before it got to the point of calling the cops, but I was terrified of him. I was too scared to leave him. I tried to leave him one time, and he called me to come over to his house, and he left a note on his bedroom door. And he was like, I've got a note on my bedroom door. I need you to read it. And I read it, and it was like, I've got a couple things laid out for you, blah, blah, blah. If I can't be with you, I don't want you to be with anybody. And I opened up the bedroom door, and there was knives, like, just strewn across his bed. And he grabbed one of them and put it up against my throat and was like, you're not leaving me. And I was too scared to leave him. I was too scared to tell anybody. Like, I was just terrified, and it was really bad. And the only way that I got out of that was finally one night he threw me, because nobody believed me too, because he was also like super manipulative, and I was at a new school. Everybody knew him. Nobody knew me. And nobody knew this side of him. And he told everybody I was crazy. So when I'm saying, like, trying to reach out to people saying, I need help, like, he hurts me, they don't believe me. And they're saying I'm crazy. And then he's not letting me talk to anybody, because if he sees me talk to anybody during the school day, that night I'm getting beat.
Sure.
And but one day he finally slipped up and threw me down at a party. And one of my girlfriends told her mom, and her mom told my mom. And that's when it was finally like, thank God somebody has seen this. Somebody can help me. And that's when we tried to go to the police, but they wouldn't really do anything. But it was enough for me to go to the police that it kind of chilled out.
Well, sure, because oftentimes gentlemen like that, what you end up finding is that they're really like sweet. They know how to really work a crowd, and you get them behind closed doors, and it's like true intentions come out.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people miss in these situations, is that somebody that's going to abuse you like that, they don't just like y'all don't just like start talking and they start hitting you and you're like, yeah, whatever. Like it's a long grooming process of getting you attached to them, detached from other people, isolated, and then, the claws come out. It's not an overnight process. It is a long, strategic process that happens. And then all of a sudden you're stuck here. You have no friends. You're not allowed to talk to anybody. Nobody believes you. And it's crazy.
And at this point, parents are separated. In a abusive relationship, what are you still 14 or are you 15 by this point?
I was 15.
So you're still a couple years away from your son being born.
Right.
What was the transition like from, getting out of this toxic relationship and then entering into motherhood? Was it this just like 24/7 like party scene, or did you kind of like did the toxicity of the relationship just kind of throw you into, I'm going to be a party girl facade now?
Yeah, no, I had been partying, and when I finally got away from that guy, that's when I met my child's father, and he was really an integral, am I using that one?
Yeah.
An integral part of me getting away from him. And we just like immediately got into a relationship, but it was partying all the time, and it was fun at that point. And then me and him were together for a few years, and then I found out I was pregnant.
Okay. And so how did motherhood start to change the trajectory of where these experiences were leading you?
So motherhood was crazy because, like I said, when I found out I was pregnant, like I stopped drinking, I stopped smoking weed, taking any pills, like I stopped smoking cigarettes, and I was really happy. And then once I had my son, and they're like, here's some Percocets, and I'm like, I can't live without these. That's when reality started to hit me that like, oh shit, I'm a teen mom. I still have this fear that I haven't woken up without because I'm an adult now. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And now my teenage years are being stripped from me.
Sure.
And it's very selfish thinking, and it's very indicative of an addict. Like, hey, mom, can you watch my son? I need to go party. Like, I need to go hang out with my friends. Like, just because I'm a mom now doesn't mean I can't go out. And it doesn't mean that, but in the way that I took it.
I also want to give some context for listeners. We're pretty similar in age, so like around this time that this is happening to you, MTV is starting to cultivate this culture of it's okay to be a teen mom, because they had the teen mom series that were almost like glamorizing it. Right. It felt like at that time, and like VH1 got in it. Like there were several just reality shows that were coming out. It's like, I'm 16 and pregnant, now I'm a teen mom, and kind of like exploring the difficulties while also saying, here's a paycheck for your pain.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I'd just like to make a note that I was 16 and pregnant before 16 and pregnant was cool, so. I'm just kidding. But yeah, it was crazy because I was still a kid, and like, I I didn't want to be a mom. Like, I'll be honest, I didn't want to be a mom. I never wanted kids. I never wanted to get married because, you know, obviously, you know, I've
home life shaped that. Yeah.
And I was like, this, you know, marriage sucks. They fight all the time. Like, I don't want kids, blah, blah, blah. And then I had him and I was like, holy shit. Like, I have him now, so I have to be a mom, but I don't know how to be a mom. And I just started constantly putting him off onto my mom and his dad. And it slowly, it would become like, oh, can you have him now? Oh, can you take him for the night? I can't, you know, I got to do this. Can you take him for the night? And then it got to the point where it was just like I was never getting him. I was always giving him to my mom and to his dad.
It starts off very slowly, but eventually you're surrendering that ability to cultivate a relationship in the long run.
Yeah. For sure. And it's crazy though, because when I first had my son, like, I was terrified. I was terrified of the world, and I was terrified for him, like, for the world. Like, if you came in the room and you wanted to hold my baby, you better wash your hands and sit down. Like, you couldn't hold my baby unless you were sitting down, you washed your hands. If you had smoked, you better take your jacket off. And I was really good with him at first, but, like, then it slowly started to become, like, about Chauncey. Okay, well, I have other people to take care of my baby, and that's his dad, and that's his grandma. They can take care of him. Like, this, I need space.
So I want to push pause on motherhood real quick and go back to something that you had mentioned about Percocets and saying that you couldn't live without them. At what point after motherhood and kind of being first introduced to perks did you start to develop that theology?
That was literally right after I had him. I was still in the hospital. And so what happened was they gave me like a prescription to take, and they didn't want to give me a prescription to take home because I hadn't had like a C-section or anything. I really didn't need them, but like, I needed, you know, my brain was like, no, you need them. And so from that point on, it was like I needed something. And I had really transitioned away from weed because I couldn't take care of my son when I was high on weed. So it was a lot of Adderall and benzos and things like that because I could get high on those, but I could take care of my son. And also, I was quote unquote prescribed to them, so it wasn't an issue because I was taking my medicine, is what I told myself.
Yeah, and abusing medication. Is somewhat, you know. I was kind of like, when we're recommending mental health resources, I would obviously always recommend someone go to counseling or to a therapist or even to a suicide prevention hotline before getting involved and just kind of, you know, brushing pills, because basically what it does is like pills just have this same reaction that alcohol does. It just pushes pause. Yeah. Rather than actually growing through the pain and actually having to kind of deal with it. And so this newfound addiction that you're finding you're now a functioning addict at this point. And you're a functioning addict who also happens to be a mother. And you talked about how there was like this transitional period where you were really good, really intentional with your son. At what point did you kind of start watching that almost Stepford Wives reality slip from you to kind of, I need to party?
So I had him when I was 17, and when I turned 18, my mom and I kind of got in like this huge fight. She's a crazy person. I love my mom. If my mom's listening, I love you, Mom, but you're a crazy person. And no, I mean, to be honest, she was tired of putting up with my bullshit. So she kicked me out. Like, as soon as I turned 18, she was like, you need to get out of here. And so I was like, okay, I'll go live with my boyfriend. And so I went to go live with my boyfriend. Me and Maddox's father had broken up. And I started seeing this other guy, and his parents had a log cabin down the street from where I lived, and they had like an apartment. It was like a garage with an apartment up above it, and they built the garage into an apartment too. Nice. And they were like, yeah, you can live here. Well, once I was out from underneath my mom, that's when I was really like, okay, like, now I got my own place. So, like, now everybody can just come to my house at, like, after 7 when I put my child down, and we can all, just hang out here and party here.
Now, were you living there rent-free, or was there, like, conditions into moving in there?
I want to say that at some point his mom wanted to charge us rent, but I, like, threw a fit and was like, I'm not paying anything. You need to pay it. It's your parents.
Nice.
Yeah, oh my God, that relationship was terrible. I was such, like, a selfish little brat in that relationship.
Would you ever think that you were selfish in that relationship because of the fact of being thrusted into motherhood, where you were talking about earlier of having those teenage years and like those early 20s like stripped away from you?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I was struggling with the fact that my life was no longer just mine. Like, I had something that I had to look out for. So anywhere that I could pull, like, ranks for just my own life, I would.
Now, at this point, you're going through pills and Percocets, and at what point were those not enough anymore?
Excuse me. So that happened. So I was living with him at 18, and then I left him, moved somewhere else for a little bit, came back to his house. I don't know how I ended up living in these people's apartment, but somewhere along the way between living with him, I ended up moving into these people's apartment. And how that happened was my friends lived in this apartment complex, and they were like letting me stay on their couch because, I know what happened. Me and him broke up, and my mom is like, you can't stay here, but you can't live here, but you can stay here when you have Maddox. So I was like couch surfing between like my mom's house and my friend's house who lived in these apartments, and we were partying there all the time. And that's when it was like, okay, somebody came over with cocaine one night, and I was like, okay, like, this is cool. Like, I'm just gonna stay up. And then once I like did it, I was like, I'm never coming down ever again. Like, I started coming down off the coke, and I was like, nope, I'll just have to stay high forever. So I stayed high for 3 days, and then I didn't have any more coke. So it was like, okay, you have to eventually come back down. And those same people had come over and were like, somebody was like, can you get us more coke? And they were like, well, we don't really do coke. We do heroin. And they were like, oh, no, we don't want that. And I was just like, my wheels were turning. And I was like, you do heroin, eh? Like, I want to do heroin. What does that make you feel like? And they were like, it makes you feel like you've done a bunch of Percocets. And all of a sudden, it was like light bulb. Like, okay, where can I get this heroin that you speak of? And they actually told me that they weren't going to let me do it because they knew that I would like it, and they didn't want to feel responsible for getting somebody hooked on it. Mm. So I went over their house one day, and they had a friend over there that had just gotten some. And I was like, please let me try it. Like, back in, like, who in the world is like, please let me try your heroin. But that's how far down. I had been drinking every night. I'd been doing a lot of ecstasy, cocaine, still getting pills every which way. And then, like, when somebody said, this will make you feel like you took a bunch of Percocets, I was like, well, I mean, that's my Lord and Savior, Oxycontin. Like, yes, please let me have some of this. And I did, and it was off to the races.
So before we jump into the heroin, what was it like coming down off of all of these, this like almost like what's the never mind. No, I got this. So at this point, before you're jumping into heroin, what is it like coming down from these like Neapolitan collection of just drugs that you're going through, whether it's pills, whether it's alcohol, whether it's weed, whether it's coke, like all of these mixed together? Like, did you find that you were just burning yourself out too quickly and it wasn't giving you what you desired?
It was, I guess it was a mix of a lot of things. First of all, it was very depressing. You know, alcohol is a depressant, and like when you are like pushing this much dopamine and all these endorphins and things like that through your brain, and then it's gone, like I was so depressed all the time, and that's why I kept having to do more and more and more. I mean, I was doing so much ecstasy, I would go to like the GNC and buy 5-HTP, which is the precursor to serotonin, so that I could build up my serotonin so that when I did the ecstasy again, I would have more serotonin flood through my brain. But I was so depressed all the time if I wasn't taking something.
And how did your relationship with, men kind of coincide with all of this as well? Because I know that sometimes when you're talking about the brokenness of childhood and kind of the abandonment issues that you face, sometimes these feelings of depression and constantly chasing a high, you're also mixing in a lot of like sex and a lot of companionship as well. Did you find that was another drug that you were drawn to?
So at this point, no.
Cool.
At this point, it was just I was still in like bro mode, where I was like, I'm one of the guys, and I can drink more than you, and I can do more drugs than you without dying. And like, I was just in bro mode, where I just wanted to be one of the guys. And I think because to me, having a friend, a guy, would last longer than like any kind of sexual relationship or like romantic relationship. So like I understood that, and I constantly wanted to be around dudes, but I didn't want to go any further than friendship, because friendship lasted longer.
You also cut out that vulnerability. So
yeah.
When you cut out that vulnerability, you have a less likely chance of getting hurt in the long run.
Right. I was super broken inside too. I was super broken, and I was not letting anybody in to hurt me. Like that was it. There was, a huge gate in front of the wall, and it was like, no, nobody is coming in here at all. Like I cannot get hurt. I can't deal with it.
So in the movie and book Dr. Sleep, Danny Torrance, who is the son of Jack from The Shining, experiences PTSD from the Overlook Hotel. And so what he does is he trains his mind to kind of take these memories and places them in boxes and ultimately suppresses them. And did you find that drugs were kind of boxes for you to where you didn't have to deal with your growing depression?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what it was. That is exactly what it was. I could not handle the pain of life. And so I would just use whatever I could to make me stop feeling. I just didn't want to feel, like, at all.
We're going to jump into the heroin side of your story in just a few minutes. We're going to take another quick commercial break. We'll be right back. How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today. Welcome back to Victims and Villains, and I want to jump into the heroin portion of your story. You were surrounding yourself with a community that was disabling your ability to actually try heroin until one day, and can you talk about how that experience kind of changed your trajectory from, less meaningful drugs to now heroin?
Can you rephrase that question?
Yeah, so
say
like
it again, I'm confused.
Like what helped the first time you tried heroin? Like, how did you kind of know that you needed more of it? Basically, like, how did it forever change your addiction?
So the first time I did it, it was just like they said. It was like taking a bunch of Percocets, and the thing that I liked about Percocets, any kind of oxycodone, any kind of opiate, is that it made me high. It made me not feel, but I could function. It wasn't like alcohol where if I get too drunk, I can't go to work. Like this, I could go to work. It made me want to clean, but it didn't keep me up like cocaine. I could still sleep on it. I thought it was like this miracle drug. It just made me feel great and warm and fuzzy inside. And I was like, this is it.
So you basically started functioning as an addict in everyday life with heroin.
Yeah, I was going to work. I was making my money and, coming home and doing my drugs and doing my drugs in the bathroom at work. And it was fine in the beginning.
So how long did you find that your high would last between having to take doses again?
Oh, back then I couldn't even tell you. Back then I could get high on a lot less for a lot longer, and I could do like a point a day, which is literally a point. I guess it's maybe a milligram. Because, like, a gram would be 10 points. It would be 0.1 on the scale. And I could do that and be fine all day long. Towards the end of my addiction, I was doing at least 2 grams a day.
How did you find that this newfound addiction affected your ability as a mother?
Oh, it was awful. By the time when I started doing heroin, it was just like, I can't keep my baby. Because I did still have some kind of moral compass to where I did not want my child to be around me when I was like that. And because even when I was partying and I had my kid, I usually just pushed him off on my mom or his dad. And then, or I would wait till he would go to sleep. And so when I started doing dope, I was in the beginning, on the days that I had him, I wouldn't do it. But it became to a point where I was like, I have to do this dope, so Mom, you're going to have to take him. And it just really started pushing me away from my son.
So not only is your addiction helping you function at this point and killing depression, but it's also creating isolation between your son and your family.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I pushed everybody away. Because by this point, when people are finding out that I'm doing heroin, they don't want to be around me. And if they don't know that I'm doing heroin and they're not doing heroin, I don't want to be around them.
So you wanted to have yourself surrounded around this darker environment.
Yeah, for sure. Because I felt like I was accepted. I could be myself there. You know, they were doing the same stuff as I was, so I didn't have to hide anything.
So how did that affect kind of your mental health and, put that strain on the relationship with, the people that actually were looking out for you?
Oh, it was awful because they were like, no, like, you can't do this and I don't want to be your friend. And I'm like, fuck you. Why wouldn't you be my friend? Like, I'm sorry, I'm going through a hard time. You can't be here for me during my hard time. Like, that was my mindset.
Well, and I would imagine that something like heroin or meth, as we'll get ready to talk about in just a few minutes, it creates this illusion that is your community now. Like, that is your counselor, and as you previously said, like God, like almost. These people over here, they want the best for you, but because of the illusion, they feel like they're against you.
Yeah, I felt like they were like shunning me, and I'm looking at them like, what's wrong with you? You're such a bad friend for not being here for me. Like, I'm just going through a hard time, and like, that's how I was in like this drugged up stupor of like, it's everybody else's fault that they don't want to be around me, and fuck them for not wanting to be a part of my life now.
Well, we all go through bad days. It's a matter of how we respond to them, whether healthy or unhealthy. And drugs, I feel like, have this unhealthy way of, like you had said, like almost framing the world into a certain way where it feels like if you're not for me, then you're against me. Yeah,
because it's easier for us to continue to use if we push away the people that are trying to stop us from using.
Well, that you don't want to admit that you're the villain in your story.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But and especially at that point, because I was like, look at me, like, yeah, okay, I do a little heroin, like, but I'm still going to work. Like, I'm not like stealing. I'm not like those people you see on TV.
Yeah,
not yet.
Because you have framed yourself as the hero in the story, and at what point did it become where heroin wasn't enough anymore?
Well, so I've gotten off of heroin a few times, and at this point in my story...
Well, can I ask you, before we kind of move on, you said that you come off of it a few times. Mm-hmm. What made you go back?
I got off of heroin, but I never did anything to fix any of my mental issues to be able to stay off of it. I just stopped doing it in some way, whether that be going to detox, whether that be moving to Las Vegas to live with my real father that I had reunited with. Like, I would get off of it, but I wouldn't fix my insides, so there was no sustainable recovery in me.
Got it.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so that was, so it was about a 10-year stretch that I was on and off of heroin, and I'd get clean for a little while, and when I was getting clean at that point, it was like getting clean off of heroin, but I was still like drinking all the time and doing other drugs recreationally, and so finally I got to a point where I started going to NA. I was like, you know what? Like, I don't want to live like this anymore. I had seen some people on Facebook, some of my old friends that had gotten clean, and they were like posting about NA, and I was like, you know what? If they can get clean, like, I can too. And obviously every way that I've tried has not worked. So I was living with my mom. I was moved back in with my mom, and I started going to NA meetings. And I was like, okay, yeah, I can do this. Cool. But I couldn't get together like longer than like 30 days clean, maybe. And I just kept going back out and going back out and going back out. And then I had met this guy in NA. We started dating. We relapsed together. He overdosed, and we called 911. They arrested both of us, and that's when I was like, okay, like, I've really had consequences now from doing heroin, so, like, now I really want to get my shit together. And I kept trying. I was like, all right, I'm not going to do dope. I'm not going to do dope. So then I got on Suboxone. And I was like, okay, this is going to work for me. And then I kept selling my Suboxone to get more dope. And what ended up happening was I finally was like, all right, I am done. And I was on the 4th day of withdrawals from heroin. And I got a phone call. It was actually New Year's Eve. And I got a phone call from somebody I knew, and they were like, hey, if you can get us some Sudafed, we'll give you some meth. And I was like, okay, well, first of all, I don't do meth, so I don't really want anything to do with that because I don't like uppers. And I'm sick as shit right now from dope withdrawals. Like, I don't want to get out the bed. And they were like, well, this... like, but it's cool. And then I was like, well, okay, well, I mean, it is New Year's Eve. Like, I'm not doing anything else. It's not like I'm doing dope. Like, I'm not going to like this. Obviously, let me party a little bit. It's New Year's Eve. Like, right?
Sure.
Grew there, and I ended up doing meth. And I was like, it did make me feel better. But I was like, I don't really know about this. Then the next day, like, I'd never seen meth. You want some? And I was like, well, I just tried meth last night, too, and I didn't really like it, so I don't really want to. I was like, no, you didn't do enough. You gotta slam, like, 0.5 gram. And I was like, whatever, dude, sure, okay, I'm not doing dope. Like, and I know I don't like it, so I'm not gonna get hooked on it. Well, apparently, when you do more of it, you can actually feel it. And I was like, boom, okay, all right, take my will in my life. Here you go, meth.
Wow.
Yeah.
So at what point, because you talked about the consequences, but at this point, knowing very little of your story up to this recording, prison a few times, how much of that is tied to the addiction of meth?
Not prison, jail.
Fair.
Yeah, I've never done long enough. The longest I've ever done is 37 days, so I'm not like a hardened well, I probably, I don't know. I don't know, like, you know, I haven't done, like, years or anything. And every time that I've gotten locked up, it has been because of drugs.
So how much of that is tied to this new addiction with meth?
So the funny thing is that I kept this habit, this dope habit for so long, this heroin habit for so long, and for like 10 years before I ever had any consequences. Well, meth comes along, and I was only on meth for 1.5 months. But in that time frame, I picked my face to shit. I got kicked out of my mom's house for the very last time. I almost got charged with stealing $19,000 from one of her friends. I was 85 pounds. I was living in a trap house making meth. This is all in 1.5 months. And by the time I got to detox, my albumin levels were so low that they said if I hadn't come in, my malnutrition would have probably killed me before the drugs would have.
Dang.
It was quick. It was quick when all that happened. But I never had any kind of jail time for meth. I didn't do it. I don't think I did it long enough to Now, if you had to ask me then, I was pretty sure that the FBI was following me.
To methamphetamines, what changed to where you just decided you didn't want to do it anymore?
I was miserable. I was so sad. I was miserable. I was living out of my car. If I was lucky, they'd let me stay on the couch at the trap house. I was terrified because I really thought that the FBI was following me. I was hallucinating so badly that, like, if I walked into a room and I saw people in there, whoever I walked in the room with, I would have to ask, hey, is there somebody else in here with us? Because I wouldn't know if they were real people or not, because I was hallucinating so bad. And then, excuse me, I'm sorry. The first thing that really, like, snapped in my head was I went home to see my mom and my kid. I had convinced my mom that my anxiety was so bad that I was just passing out and not being able to sleep. I went home and I was talking to myself. My mom saw me talking to myself, and she was like, who are you talking to? And I was like, I'm on the phone. And she was like, your phone's in here. And I was so sleep deprived. I hadn't done meth that day. I was so sleep deprived that I kept falling asleep standing up. So I would literally, like, take 2 steps and then just fall asleep and hit the floor. And I kept going into the bathroom to try to do more heroin, and all you could hear from the bathroom was boom, 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 because I kept falling asleep and falling, and I'd wake up and my head would be hit up against the bathtub, and my son was there. And that was the first time that my son had ever seen me, like, visibly seen me fucked up. Because he'd never even seen me drink a beer. And like I said, when I was doing heroin, I could function so well. It wasn't, it wasn't like this. But this was me at 85 pounds, picked face, talking to myself, falling asleep. And that's when I was like, shit, this is affecting my son. Like, I'm really fucking up my son now. And so I left that day, and that's when I really started thinking, I was like, I need to get help. And I started, like, calling people in recovery that I'd already known. Like, I need to get help. Like, I need help. And I wasn't completely ready yet. But then one night, one of the guys at the trap house was like, the FBI is on us. And, like, we're driving and, like, trying to, like, haul ass out of the house. And I'm driving down the road, and every car I see, I think, is a FBI agent following me. And we got to the store, and I was like, oh my God, like, I'm going to go to prison for a really long time, because manufacturing methamphetamine is like 40 years.
Oh, wow.
So at that point, I'd only done like a week in jail. So I was like, I can't go to prison like that. That's crazy. And so finally, it was just like so much of, I'm fucking up my son. I have nowhere to live. I think that the FBI is following me. I'm hallucinating and finding myself in crazy places. And like, I have got to get help. I can't do this anymore. And so finally, I got in touch with my old best friend who hadn't talked to me in a long time. She was actually working at the McShin Foundation, which is a sober living, it's a recovery community organization. And I was like, look, please help me. I have no money. I have nothing, but I've got to get in somewhere or I'm going to die. And she was like, all right, go to Tucker's Detox tomorrow. And if you make it through detox, we will scholarship you for the first 2 weeks into our houses. And that's what I did.
So what was it like going through recovery?
It It was weird. So I had lived a certain way for so long, and then I had to go to a detox. First of all, heroin withdrawals are the worst things that I've ever been through in my entire life. Like, I don't give a fuck. That is the hardest thing I've ever gone through, next to heartbreak. Like, it is awful. And so when I got out of detox, I went to the McShin program. They put me in a recovery house, which is basically a house full of like 10 or 12 other girls who are trying to recover too. We would go up to the church. They had a center at the church where we do groups all day long. And then at night we would go to an NA meeting, and then we'd go back to our house. We'd get drug tested there, and there was rules. And at this point, I'm almost 30 years old, and I'm coming into a house where they're going to tell me I got to have a curfew and have visitors for the first 30 days, and I can't do this and I can't do this. And I've lived, y'all going to tell me that I can't do shit? I was such a brat. But at this point, I was just like, you know what? Whatever. I don't know what y'all are trying to make me do right. A lot better than what life was out there, so I'll do it. And I did what I was supposed to do for almost 60 days. And then I moved into the recovery house that I was living. They were closing that actual house. They had other houses, but Hanover County didn't want a recovery house in their county. So they went ahead and let the lease run up. And I moved into an apartment. It was a sober living apartment complex. And I wasn't ready. And I relapsed, like, immediately. I had surgery. I had to get an ovary cut out. I had a melon-sized tumor on my ovary. And so I had to get that cut out, and they put me on the morphine drip. With hardly any time clean, you put me on the morphine drip. I'm like, okay, well, this actually isn't strong enough. Hello, can somebody come bring me some dope up to the hospital? And it was off to the races again.
So with this new found, I guess, relapse again,
mm-hmm.
How long was it until you were like, I need to get clean for real this time?
So that one didn't last very long because I was on pretrial from the charge when my boyfriend had overdosed. And I thought I was being sly because I was like, okay, I have paperwork that says I was on morphine. Heroin metabolizes as morphine when you do a urine analysis, so it'll be fine. They won't know that I've done dope because I've got morphine paperwork. Well, apparently there was fentanyl in the dope, and my probation officer or my pretrial officer was like, well, yeah, you said you were on morphine, but did they give you fentanyl in the hospital? And I was like, shit. She got my ass, boy. And a week later, I was in jail, and that's when I did the 37 days in jail. And in my foxhole prayer, once I got up in jail, boy, for real, I was like, all right, where's the NA book, y'all? Like, I'm ready to do this shit.
So at this point, desperation's like really set in.
Yes.
And you're like, I need to do it for real this time.
Yeah.
And there's almost this like sense of like rebellion that I have like known other friends that have gone through like alcoholism and like also drug addiction.
Mm-hmm.
There's also this like sense of like rebellion when they're trying to get clean, to where it's like we're putting these rules into place for your accountability and your longevity to stay sober. And it's ironic that you spent 60 days in that environment and still, again, had that relapse.
Yeah.
But then, 37 days, which is half the time you spent in that environment, just said, I need to get clean and I need to get sober now.
Yeah. So one of the greatest, like, gifts, I call it a gift, excuse me. I don't know why I keep... Excuse me. One of the greatest gifts that I had in that jail cell was the aha moment of, I've been focusing so long on trying to not do drugs that my focus has been drugs, drugs, drugs. But now that I'm in this jail cell, I realize that what I really want is to live a happy, successful, fulfilling life. And that has been the thought that was the catalyst for everything since then. Because it was like, that's where I need to switch it to. I need to switch my focus to that, successful, fulfilling life. And when I did that, everything else followed suit. It was like, okay, and even like the rebellion and things like that, like the buck in the system, like, okay, I'm going to do what you tell me to do because I know that they're going to lead me to this ultimate goal.
And so this trial goes down, and what was the outcome of the actual trial?
Okay, so that lasted 3 years. It went on for 3 years. It kept getting continued. It got continued downstairs for like a few times because they didn't have the labs back. Then I had to, I went to court and it got continued. And then I went to court again and they were like, okay, we're going to put you on the first offenders program. All you have to do is stay clean, don't get in trouble, and do 150 hours of community service. And we will drop the charges. And they gave me a year to do that. And I was, was on probation or whatever. My dumb ass didn't do the community service because I was just too good for community service. So then they gave me another 30 days to do my community service, and I tried to manipulate the system and like come up with all these reasons why I couldn't do it, but it was really because I just didn't feel like doing it. So they hit my ass with a felony. I got possession of Schedule 1 drugs felony, and that sucks, but that was definitely my fault. I could have gotten it taken care of, and I didn't. And but progress, not perfection.
Yeah, I mean, also pride sometimes is our own downfall.
Yeah.
So at this point, you are how old? Like during the process of cleaning and getting yourself sober?
So I turned, in those 37 days, I turned 30 years old in jail. April 22nd, 2018.
Okay, so we're coming up on just about a 3-year anniversary, and so you're about a little over 2.5, almost 3 years sober at this point.
I have 2 years because I did go out one day after getting out of jail, and that was just stupid. And I was like, I don't even know why I did this. So I hit 2 years October 4th of this year.
And knowing you in the short time that we've known each other, you have just become this advocate for sobriety and really having people have that awareness that cleaning yourself up is possible.
Yeah.
And at what point in your sobriety did you kind of become that advocate to bring awareness to people?
So I've always I've always really advocated for recovery since I've been in it. But I think that after my first year, I really started having the confidence to be like, okay, now I have some experience in recovery, and now I want to give back because I am a part of an anonymous 12-step program, and the main purpose is to carry the message to the addict who still suffers. And I wanted to give back because, it says in our literature that we can only keep what we have by giving it away. And I want to be an open book. I mean, my life has changed so much And I am doing things that I never thought that I would be able to do. And things like, having my own place and really being able to take care of myself. And all the way down to like little things like being able to make my own, phone call to a doctor and set my own appointment. Things that I was always so scared of. And like just the peace and the serenity and the joy in my life now. I want that to be spread. I want to share that. And, as well as breaking stigma. And I know, we working together, I know you hear me talk about it all the time. And, I like to joke about, being a crackhead and stuff like that. But, I like to do it as well, though, to make it more commonplace, to try to break the stigma, to have somebody who might not be an addict hear it, and maybe it does something in their brain like, oh, okay, maybe not all addicts are what I thought that they were, or maybe it is a mental illness, or maybe I have a friend that, I can understand a little bit better now.
Sure, self-deprecating humor is a great weapon to have in your arsenal when you're trying to bring attention to those things. Yeah. And before we kind of get into life with you as a sponsor, what, that first year of going through those 12 steps and making amends and starting to kind of, pick up pieces from relationships that have been broken, taking out relationships that weren't healthy for you. I mean, describe some of those challenges in that first year of being sober.
The first year for me was not easy. I was very insecure. I was broken. I was trying to figure out who I was. I was just really scared of everything because I'd been hiding behind this, wall of drugs. My mind had been clouded for so long that when the clouds were away, like it was really scary to see how much wide open space the world really was. But I did it. I got a sponsor. I started working steps. I went through, It was kind of ugly. That's when I started doing my self-seeking behaviors, and I started sleeping around and things like that. Because I kind of got a little bit of confidence back, but still had no self-esteem.
Sure.
So I started self-seeking, validation in men and things. I got pregnant. I had a miscarriage, which ended up being a blessing because that was a whole terrible thing and probably would not have been the greatest thing at like 30 days clean. But I went through a lot of different changes. I got a job, which I still work at today. I got some self-worth back. And I don't even know. I got through so much pain that I never thought that I would get through.
Yeah, it's crazy when you go through those transformations in your life where you are specifically with community and realizing how vital it is for your growth as an individual that, we talked about the atmosphere that we surround ourselves with at the beginning of the show, and atmosphere, it plays a big part into our growing process as well. And so surrounding yourself with those steps, a sponsor, the accountability, and then you hit 1 year and that confidence, newfound job, and, you're just, really shaping and changing your life around. What point did it kind of open up the door to say, now I want to be that for someone else and I want to start sponsoring people?
Yeah. So as soon as the way that my sponsorship family works is, you have to have a year clean and you have to have worked a 4th step. And so in the 12-step program that I'm in, they don't do steps as quickly as another 12-step program does. So I was just getting on to my 4th step, and I was I have to do it. I just wanted to. I think that I had always had that, because since I was a little girl, I was always the one trying to make people happy and things like that, the party girl trying to entertain everybody. And then so now it was kind of, a different platform where like I just wanted to be able to help somebody. And I think it was really like right before I got a year, I was like, I think I can do this. Like I am doing this, and I actually think that I might have something to offer other people. And that's what this year has really been about for me. It was, crossing that first year. And I remember when I got my first sponsee, I was so excited. And then she asked me, and I was like, oh shit, this is real. Like, somebody actually wants my help. What am I going to do? I don't know what to do with my hands now. It was so scary. But then I had, I kind of learned that, like, I'm just there to direct them with my experience. And if I don't have experience in that, I can, say, oh, well, this person does. You should call them, use your network.
For listeners that have never gone through a 12-step program, what does being a sponsor actually entail?
Okay, so being a sponsor is so you have the 12 steps, and a sponsor is a person that walks you through those steps. There's different ways to do the steps. We have a workbook. You can do them through the basic text. But all a sponsor really is a person to take you through the steps. Now, what a sponsor ends up being is like a soundboard of bouncing off ideas. Hey, I'm going through A, B, and C. How did you get through that? And that's where a sponsor is like, okay, well, this is my experience on that, or I don't have any experience, but I can give you such and such phone number. It's just kind of like a spirit guide, but not so much.
That's cool. So this year we're still relatively new into this year.
Yeah.
So it feels so weird, like talking about like 2020
yeah.
as being last year, but here we are.
Right.
You also kind of took that self-deprecating humor to another step. We joked around. We weren't going to talk about this, but I think that it kind of has helped you grow, kind of be more well-rounded into the person that you are now. TikTok has actually been a actual creative realm for you to step into. And, you talked about, having all of that energy when you talk about, going through and having, time for like heroin and, all the drugs and stuff that you did, like all that energy has to go somewhere. And, having an outlet, something like TikTok or podcasting, how has that improved your mental health and the journey of recovery?
Oh, it's been great. So, so I started TikTok as like a creative outlet because I love doing crafts. I love doing art and stuff like that. But like, that shit gets expensive sometimes. So I wanted to do something else, and I used to do music, and I used to write a lot of songs, but that's just not. I don't want to say it's not my passion anymore, but that's just not where I'm at right now. And I just I'm not thinking deeply enough to like write a great song, but I want to do something. And I was like, you know what? TikTok looks like it would be fun. So I got on there and I was like, there's not a lot of comedy for like sober TikTok, which I found out later on it was because I hadn't been on TikTok long enough. But I was like, I want to bring light to the situation, and I love self-deprecating humor. And so I started doing TikTok videos, and it's been really cool because it makes me think back to the times. Like I did one yesterday that was like when you live under a bridge, but your friend lives in her car. And like I got in there, I was like, oh, your house is so pretty. Like, and it reminds me of those times. It reminds me that this is where I've been, and this is where I can go back to, and this is where I don't want to be ever again. And it's been nice too. I didn't realize how many people it was going to reach and like help. I thought it was just going to be like me, like watching my own videos, but it's actually turned into people being like, hey, I've got 1 day clean. Like, I know if you can do it, I can do it. And like being able to open up a whole new network. And it's almost like, it's almost kind of service work to be able to, put your videos out there and be able to connect with these people because they're really getting something out of it. Or just watching somebody else's video and they're like, I've got 30 days clean, and just like type it on there and be like, go girl, like you got this.
That's awesome.
And the community on there has been great. It's also shown me my addictive side. Because when I first started, it was just like, oh, this is just a hobby. And then like once one of my videos started like getting all this attention, and I was like, oh shit, like all like this validation started flooding me, and I was like, oh my God, this is great. Now I've got to put out this content, and I've got to put out this content, and this isn't going to be good enough, and I'm not going to be able to top what my name is.
Yeah.
I'm like freaking out. So I actually called my sponsor, and I talked to my sponsor about it, because now that my focus isn't really on drugs, like I still like to talk to my sponsor about things that affect my recovery.
Sure.
And I felt like that was affecting my recovery, because I was like, I couldn't be in a room with people and like converse with them, because my brain was constantly on a hamster wheel that was like, oh, what am I going to do for a TikTok video? And all these ideas just going around in my head. And like, I didn't know what was going on. And I was like, all right, I'm going to pause for a minute. And I did. So I got off of there for a few weeks and kind of reassessed the situation and was like, all right, we're going back in here, but we're going to make sure we keep the focus on it being a hobby. Like, I really have no intention of being this huge TikTok star. I just want to do it for fun, and let's keep it fun.
That's the thing sometimes, that when you get into something like TikTok or YouTube or podcasting, like it's so easy to just like slide into that like obsession level, and you have to kind of, create those barriers for yourself, and having, a community to kind of like keep you humble, but also keep you accountable and say, hey, like, how many hours did you spend editing your TikToks today?
Yeah.
And just, really making sure that you're placing those barriers in front of yourself, because one of the best lines I've ever heard spoken in any media is, we're all addicts, even without the drugs. Mm-hmm. It was from Nip Tuck. And the older I get, the more that I realize how faithful that line is.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to fall into addictions, and addictions kind of get this nasty reputation where it can only be exclusively drugs, or it can only be exclusively alcohol. And it's like, well, no, actually, like, you can get addicted to TikTok, YouTube, pornography, cooking. Like, there's a number of different things.
Spending money. That was my early recovery. Was I replaced drugs with just spending money on stupid shit. It's funny that you bring that up, though, because I actually was on TikTok the other night, and this guy had posted something, and I commented on his video, and then I added him, and he added me back, and he messaged me, and he was like, hey, I'm new to this thing, like, I just want to share my experience, and I don't really know what to do next, and, I kind of gave him some pointers, and I said, but remember, we're still addicts, and this can be an addiction, so make sure you keep your focus on spreading the message of hope, and try not to get caught up in this validation, because that just happened to me, and it's like, it just works. It's just like a better cycle.
Yeah. So I think that's going to end it for us, but where can people follow you on TikTok?
You can follow me on TikTok at addict named Chauncey. Thank you.
I don't think I knew that handle. You guys can find us everywhere at victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can find links to our socials, which include Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, and Twitch. And you guys can also get past episodes, movie reviews, and most importantly, our suicide prevention resources. Chauncey, I thank you so much for doing this episode.
Thank you.
And we're also going to provide in the links below anyone that might have been listening to this and you're struggling yourself with an addiction of the drug or alcohol variety. We're going to provide links in the descriptions for you guys as well. So until next time.